Hi, my name is Bob and I'm renovating this 1973 Egg Harbor Sportfish boat. Well, welcome everyone to Renovation Sportfish. Welcome back to those who've been following along all the way so far. Here we are, episode 6, and we're into the year 2013. This is the first 3 months of the year, so we're talking January, February, March. Not great months to be installing anything. Not great months to be working on the boat outside. So you're limited to what you can do. It's cold, it gets dark early, and there's a lot of snow. At least here in New England, it's like that. So basically, I'm stuck working in a shop, fitting things at the boat on the weekends, and you can't really install anything because it's too cold for epoxy to dry. So anyways, with that said, here we go. We do some windshield stuff. So episode 6. Hope you enjoy it. So in the last episode, we ended the episode with a template that I had made for the center post for the windshield. Now the template was a 1/4-inch plywood template, and I had fit it all up and was ready to go. So the next step was to take a raw piece of mahogany. This is the piece here. I actually showed this in the last episode, but if you didn't see it, I'm showing it again. It's about 1.5 inches, maybe a little wider than that actually, and it's sapele mahogany. I had already cut some bevels on this side of it with my table saw, and this is for, it was supposed to be this way, the windshield frame would sit on these 2 flat surfaces in the middle. So that was done. Now my plan was to take the template and stick it to this raw piece of mahogany with this double-sided tape. Now you can get this anywhere. I use it for all my templates all the time. I use the templates as a guide for my router. So you bought this tape. It's got a paper backing on this side. It's sticky on the other side, and I just cut a bunch of little pieces, stick them along, pull this tape off, and the backing off, and stick the plywood down to it. And there you go. You got a guide. The problem was, that was my plan. Of course, didn't work because the problem was I bought this router bit. And I've used it for other things. I used it when I did the rub rails and other episodes and things like that. And shear clamps. I used it for those too. It's just not deep enough. It's not deep, it's not deep enough to router this piece of wood. The blade is too short. So this whole idea was out. I couldn't do it. So that was a bummer. So after I had rough cut out this piece, I had to, and I used a jigsaw for that, by the way, so it's not the most accurate thing when you're cutting something really thick. I had to do basically hand sand it down to its final shape, and that was a lot of work. In hindsight, if I had a bandsaw, that would have worked out really nice, but I didn't have one. I didn't do it that way. So it was a lot of manual work to get this piece fitted and matched to the actual template. Once I got it to that stage and I matched the template, then I was able to route the edge of it with my router and a round over bit to just clean it up and make it look really nice. So once I got this piece over to the boat, I had to fit it in there. Now it fit pretty good actually. I had to do a little bit of sanding towards the bottom to get it to fit to the the V shape of how the decking was coming back, and just get where it met the deck. I had to kind of sand it down so that it sat as flush as I could get it. And so then I had to attach it just for a temporary fit. Now at the top, I had to remove a little piece of wood that was already in place along the center of the ceiling. And that little piece of wood, which you can see on the right side here, is still installed. That piece, there was a seam for the plywood on the plywood decking. right down the middle. So they used two pieces. They used one on the port and one on the starboard. The seam was right down the middle. And they used this little, I don't know, it was probably only about 1.5 inches wide by maybe a 1/2 inch thick piece of wood. They ran along the whole thing. They actually notched out the ceiling beams to go around this piece of wood. So I had to take that piece off first in the front. And that's where you can see it removed here. And so at the top, I just screwed down through the 3/8 flybridge plywood decking into the top of the center post. At the bottom, from the inside, I screwed into the deck beams. As you can see, this one little screw down in the center here. And then on the outside, on the lower section, I just screwed down right at the center of the post, down into the same deck in the deck beam. So that was it. I got the center post fitted, and so now I had the center and the two sides fitted, so now I could start on the windshield frame and start fabricating that. So after purchasing some mahogany to fabricate these windshield frames, I rough cut them to the dimensions I thought that I was going to need to start with a little extra, of course. I figured I would start with just the lower pieces before I started assembling the four sides together. Now the lower pieces were the most complicated pieces. They had to conform to the deck camber. The whole window frame itself was tipped back, so they had those angles to deal with, and both frames together were kind of in a V configuration. Now the only problem I encountered when fitting the lower windshield framing pieces was the fact that I couldn't get the two pieces to line up perfectly in the center. I tried, and if I would fix that, then the bottom would be off, and then I'd fix that, and then the middle center seam would be off again. And so I was just chasing my tail, and I just ended up saying, okay, everything's fitting great except for that, and that's just going to have to be filled with thickened epoxy when I assemble everything. And so that's the decision I made, and that's what I stuck with. Now I'm putting up this sketch of the factory cross section for the upper windshield frame and the associated pieces of wood that they had installed in there. The two pieces of plywood, the inner and outer plywood pieces, I left those in for fitting the rest of the window frame pieces. Now, one of the things that I didn't do that the factory did was miter the four pieces of the window frame in the corners. You can see this picture here, it's kind of rotted away, but you can see how they kind of mitered the pieces. Now to me this was just too difficult to try to figure out, and the pieces were too rotted to actually use as any kind of templates to get any kind of information out of them. And the miters weren't really exactly the same from one window to the other one. They were a little bit different actually. And so I went for a different type of construction, and time will tell if that construction is fine or not. And it was a much simpler way to build it, and that's how I chose to do it with my skill level at that time. And I think it looks a lot cleaner anyways. once all the pieces were fitted at the boat, I brought everything back to the shop, set up my flat surface, put some plastic down on it, and assembled all the pieces with biscuits and epoxy at all the joints. Then I used these angles to hold everything flat with some clamps. Now, if you'll notice, the angles are actually some pieces of an old bed frame that I had lying around. But it worked great. Everything worked out fine. So once these windshield frame assemblies were dry, I brought them over to the boat one last time. And that was just to mark where the center post was, the side posts, and the upper trim piece from the inside of the frame. That gave me a guide to position the window opening in there the same on both pieces so they both look symmetrical. I brought it all home and made this template out of 1/4" plywood. Nothing fancy, it's just regular plywood. It's not marine gray, but it's almost voidless, so it worked out good. I took the actual piece of glass, laid it on this piece of plywood, traced the perimeter, and then drew another line 1/2 inch in from that, parallel to that, and that was the actual opening size. Cut that out with a jigsaw, as close as I could get, without getting too crazy. And then I used a longboard sander and other sanders to get everything smooth and straight so I wouldn't have any, wiggly lines or anything like that. Once that was done, I laid this template onto the actual windshield frame and traced the opening, cut that out with the jigsaw again, leaving about 1/8 inch or a little more material. And then I came back and double-sided taped this template down on top of the frame and used that as a guide with a flush cutting router bit to get the exact opening I wanted. Once that was done, I got a rabbiting bit and routed with a rabbit around the whole perimeter. It was like a 1/2 inch bit, so it was like a 1/2 inch by a little over 1/2 inch deep. And that was it. Then after that, there was just a little bit of cleanup to do, and I just took a round over bit in my router and rounded over some of the edges that needed to be rounded. And that was it. The both windshield frames had their openings cut in. So the only thing left to do once I had the opening cut all the way around was to fit the aluminum retainer piece. Now you can hear all about this aluminum retainer piece if you watch episode 2 when I talked about removing the windows, and I talked all about this retainer. So here's a photo of the actual retainer being fitted into this particular window opening that I cut, and I had to do a little tweaking in the corners, but other than that everything fit really well. So back at the boat, it was time to remove these outer and inner plywood pieces, I'm calling them, just to keep it simple. The outside piece, I wasn't going to replace that just yet. That was going to be down the road, so I wasn't really worried about that right now. It was mostly the inner piece. And the inner piece from the factory was only attached to the upper piece and the windshield frame. It wasn't attached at the sides to the center post and the side post. I wanted to have this piece attached at the sides as well, because I wanted a nice solid 4-sided thing for this windshield frame to attach to when I put that in. So I had to figure out a way to attach this upper inner piece to the center post and the side post. Now for the center post, I decided to cut we call it a rabbet, I guess, into the center post, and then have this piece drop into there. And you can see this rabbet I cut. It's kind of generous spacing, but it allowed me to move things around. And it was going to be filled with thickened epoxy anyway, so there was no screws here. It was just that's what all was going to hold. It was epoxy. So I didn't really care if it was a super tight fit. Plus there was going to be wood attached on top of it, and I thought that was fine. On the outer side post on that, there's a little piece that you'll see up in the corner here that I had to replace. I'll talk about that in a minute. But this upper inner piece, whatever I'm going to call it here, screws into that on the end. And you can see here in this photo how it actually sits on that piece. Now this upper piece, I didn't want to make it out of plywood. I made it out of solid mahogany. And later on down the road, I also made the outer plywood piece out of solid mahogany too. So I didn't use any plywood for any of this window framing. That brings us to the last couple little pieces that I needed to replace to get this windshield frame fitted in, and that's these side window pieces. I'm calling them the inner plywood piece. Here's a piece, you can see it in blue here in the sketch. These were plywood the entire way. I didn't have to replace the entire piece, but I had to replace a section of each piece at the windshield area and a section towards the back part of the side window. Now there were different lengths pieces I had to remove and replace. The starboard side, which you can see here, wasn't quite as long as the port side piece that I had to replace. As far as I could take the windshield assembly at this point. I had to wait for warmer weather to come around so I could start assembling and epoxying in some of these pieces. None of these pieces I've talked about in this entire video were installed with epoxy because it was just too cold. It was the beginning of the year and temperatures were cold. So I was hoping for warmer weather. Well, thanks everyone for watching. Hope you enjoyed it, and I guess until next time, everyone have a good one, and we'll see you soon.